They died in perfect health, 16 of them. In the dead of a New York winter, the most promising sons of America's elite just stopped. No sickness, no struggle. Their hearts just ceased. Doctors looked at their serene, sleeping faces and saw nothing. An absolute, terrifying, scientific nothing. The year was 1837. The place was the Elysian Vale Seminary, a name deliberately scrubbed from the maps. The official story was a ghost story, a footnote. But the truth is a key. It unlocks a door to a room you were never meant to enter. A room where power, science, and the human soul were fused into a weapon. The real question isn't how they died. It's what were they turned into? Imagine a place so pure, so isolated, it felt like a pocket outside of time. That was the Elysian Vale Seminary, nestled deep in the Hudson Valley, a fortress of intellect and spirit founded in 1837. This wasn't some backwoods Bible school. It was an institution created for a very specific purpose, for a very specific kind of student. The sons of industrialists, of senators, of the old money families that were forging the very skeleton of a new nation. They were sent here not just to learn Latin and theology, but to be molded, to be shaped into a new generation of leaders, men of unwavering discipline and profound insight. The grounds were immaculate, the air crisp and clean, the silence between lessons so deep you could hear the snow settling on the pines. It was a picture of tranquility, a bastion of order against the chaos of the frontier world. But that pristine silence was a lie. It was the calm surface of a very, very deep body of water, and underneath something was beginning to stir. The seminary was a crucible designed to burn away the impurities of the common man and forge something else, something stronger, something colder. And the heat was about to be turned up. At the center of this perfect world stood its creator doctor, Alistair Finch. He was a figure who seemed to walk straight out of an old legend. Tall, gaunt, with eyes that didn't just look at you. They seemed to measure the weight of your soul. He wasn't your typical headmaster. His sermons were less about scripture and more about potential, the untapped power of the human mind. He spoke of resonance, of frequencies, of shedding the crass materialism of the flesh to achieve a higher state of awareness. To the parents who sent their boys to him, he was a visionary, a man who could instill the iron will needed to rule. To the students, he was something more, a guide, a master. His voice had a strange hypnotic quality, a cadence that could calm the most anxious heart or ignite a fire of fanatical devotion. Finch had spent years abroad, not on the grand tour of Europe, but in its shadows, in forgotten monasteries, in the private libraries of esoteric societies. He didn't just collect books, he collected knowledge, forbidden knowledge, systems of thought that the modern world had tried to bury. And now, in his isolated New York Valley, he was ready to begin. His great experiment began on a Tuesday in January. The student's name was Nathaniel Blackwood, son of a shipping magnate. He was the golden boy captain of the debate team, fluent in 3 languages, destined for greatness. He was found in his bed by his roommate, looking for all the world like. He was simply asleep, but he was cold, stone cold. There were no signs of distress. No foam on his lips, no bruises, no hint of a seizure. His face was placid, almost blissful. The local doctor, a practical man named Harris, was summoned. He spent hours examining the body, growing more and more perplexed. The boy was the very picture of health. Strong heart, clear lungs, an athlete's physique. Yet he was gone. Dr. Harris, in his official report, had to invent a term. He called it a sudden visitation of God, a tragic, inexplicable failure of the vital spark. He privately confessed to the sheriff that he'd never seen anything like it. It was as if Nathaniel Blackwood's body had simply forgotten how to live. It was the first note in a symphony of silence, a single perfect death that defied all reason, the first sacrifice on an altar no one yet knew had been built. From the private journal of Dr. Alistair Finch, Jan. 1837. The first string has been tuned. The resonance was purer than anticipated. The vessel could not contain the vibration. A necessary, beautiful failure. We will adjust the frequency. One death is a tragedy. Two is a pattern. A week later, another boy, Edward Pierce, was found in the exact same state. Lying peacefully in his bed, a faint smile on his lips, his life extinguished without a whisper. Now a cold dread began to seep through the seminary's stone walls. This wasn't a visitation from God. This was something else. Dr. Finch acted swiftly. He quarantined the school, cutting it off completely from the outside world. No letters out, no visitors in. He told the terrified students it was a precaution against a silent, airborne sickness, but there were no symptoms. No one had a cough. No one had a fever. The only symptom was a sudden, final serenity. The fear was different from a normal fear of disease. It was a psychological poison. Boys started eyeing each other with suspicion. They became afraid of falling asleep. Some started reporting strange dreams, a low, persistent humming sound that seemed to come from the very stones of the chapel. It was a sound, they said, that you felt more in your bones than you heard with your ears. The quarantine wasn't to keep a sickness in. It was to keep the truth from getting out. In the midst of this rising tide of fear, Dr. Finch was an island of absolute calm. He gathered the remaining students in the grand assembly hall. The air was thick with panic. Finch stood before them, his presence alone seeming to suck the hysteria out of the room. He did not speak of medicine or contagion. He spoke of trials, of fire. He told them that great men are not born, they are forged, that their souls were being tested, weighed in a divine balance. Do not fear the stillness, he said, his voice a low, resonant hum. Fear the noise of a common life. What is happening here is not an end, but a transition, a purification. Only the strongest vessels can hold the purest light. It was masterful. He wasn't dismissing their fear. He was reframing it. He turned a terrifying mystery into a noble quest, a badge of honor. He was isolating them not just physically, but psychologically, cutting them off from conventional reality and pulling them into his own. He was the shepherd, and his flock, terrified and confused, looked only to him for salvation. They had no idea he was leading them to the slaughter dot. By the time the fourth student died, the local authorities could no longer be held at bay. A team of the best physicians from Albany was dispatched, determined to solve the mystery of the Elysian Vale faintings. They brought with them the latest tools of 19th century medicine. They performed autopsies with meticulous care, searching for any clue, any toxin, any microscopic lesion that could explain the deaths. They found nothing, literally nothing. The organs were perfect. The tissues were healthy. The brain chemistry, as far as they could tell, was normal. It was a complete and utter scientific dead end. One doctor, writing in a confidential letter to a colleague, put it plainly. It is as if the soul itself was surgically removed, leaving behind a flawless, empty shell. We are either dealing with a force unknown to science, or we are all going mad. They were forced to file a report that was a monument to ignorance, filled with vague speculation about nervous exhaustion and atmospheric conditions. They had hit a wall built of impossible facts. The silence of the victims was now echoed by the silence of science itself. Asterisk, they said the bell never rang. Not once. The tower was for something else, something older. At night, if you were one of the chosen, You could feel the hum. So what force was at play? To understand, you have to look past the seminary's pristine Christian facade and into the heart of its founder. Dr. Finch's personal library, kept under lock and key, was his true church. It contained very few Bibles. Instead, the shelves were heavy with texts that would have gotten a man burned at the stake 2 centuries earlier. Ancient Gnostic Gospels that spoke of archons and a false reality. Hermetic scrolls detailing the principles of vibration and correspondence. As above, so below. Treatises from the secret societies of Europe on mental alchemy, the transmutation of the human spirit. There were diagrams of the human body that showed not just organs, but meridians of energy, chakras, and resonant points. Finch wasn't a man of God. He was a practitioner of a forgotten science, a hidden physics of the soul. He believed humanity had taken a wrong turn, embracing a crude materialism while ignoring the subtle energies that truly shape reality. He believed the soul wasn't a metaphysical concept, but a measurable wave, a frequency that could be isolated, amplified, and tuned. This was the secret curriculum at Elysian Vale. While most students spent their afternoons translating Virgil, Finch's inner circle, the most resilient, the most intelligent, the most psychically sensitive boys, were introduced to another kind of lesson. He called it resonant theology. It had nothing to do with prayer. It was a rigorous, brutal training designed to break down the body's resistance and heighten its sensitivity. It involved long periods of fasting and a specialized diet free of salt and heavy meats, designed to purify the vessel. It involved hours spent in total darkness and silence, a form of sensory deprivation meant to force the mind to turn inward. And most critically, it involved the nightly attunements. The inner circle would be led to the chapel, not to pray, but to sit in silence on the cold stone floor for hours, while a low, penetrating hum filled the space around them. They were told it was a form of meditation, a way to harmonize their inner spirit with the music of the spheres. They were being prepared. They were being turned into antennae, ready to receive a signal they couldn't possibly comprehend. That hum. Where did it come from? It wasn't the wind. It wasn't the building settling. It came from the bell tower. But there was no bell. In its place, Finch had constructed a bizarre apparatus, a machine of his own design based on diagrams he'd discovered in a suppressed text from a Pythagorean sect. It was a complex array of polished brass plates of varying sizes, crystalline structures, and tightly wound copper coils, all arranged in precise geometric patterns around a central resonating chamber. It was beautiful, intricate, and utterly alien. Finch called it his harmonizer, but his private journals used a more accurate name, the psychoacoustic resonance engine, the soul engine. It didn't produce sound in the normal sense. It produced infrasound low-frequency vibrations that were felt rather than heard. Finch believed that by striking the plates in specific sequences and with precise force, he could generate a resonant frequency that matched the theoretical frequency of the human soul itself. He could literally vibrate the soul, loosening its connection to the physical body. He wasn't trying to kill them. He was trying to set them free. Fact, in the 1830s, the line between science and mysticism was razor-thin. Respected figures like Franz Mesmer promoted theories of animal magnetism, an invisible fluid that connected all living things. The idea that unseen energies could profoundly affect the human body wasn't fringe. It was cutting edge. Here is the terrifying truth at the heart of the Elysian Vale mystery. The 16 deaths were not murders. They were accidents. Catastrophic, horrific, industrial accidents on a spiritual assembly line. Finch was a visionary, a genius, but he was working with forces he did not fully understand. His theory was that if he could gently tune a student's soul to a higher frequency, he could unlock psychic abilities, superior intelligence, a state of enlightened consciousness. The soul engine was his tuning fork. But the human system is fragile. He would start the engine, and the subtle vibration would permeate the chapel, and then the entire seminary. For most, it was just a faint hum. But for his inner circle, the sensitized students, it was a seismic event. For some, the frequency was too high. The vibration was too intense. The delicate connection between soul and body, the silver cord of esoteric lore, didn't just loosen. It snapped. And the body, its animating force suddenly gone, would simply stop. Each death was a failed experiment, a data point that sent Finch back to his diagrams, adjusting the frequency, refining. The technique, convinced he was just one calibration away from success. And what about the survivors? The ones who were being tuned but hadn't broken yet? They became a community of ghosts. The constant exposure to the engine's frequency was changing them, hollowing them out. The school's physician, under Finch's control, noted their symptoms. With detached curiosity, traumatic weight loss, translucent skin, dilated pupils that seemed to absorb the light. But the physical changes were nothing compared to the psychological ones. Some students fell into long periods of catatonia, staring at walls for hours, unresponsive. Others claimed to have ecstatic visions, describing landscapes of impossible color and geometry. Many lost the ability to feel strong emotions, their faces becoming placid, emotionless masks. They were becoming more like Dr. Finch, calmer, more distant, less human. They were caught in a terrible limbo, their souls half in and half out of their bodies. They were living proof that the engine was working. The process of ascension was underway, and the cost was their humanity. We know this because one of them escaped. A boy named Julian Croft, whose family was less connected and more skeptical than the others. He fled the seminary in the dead of night, weeks before the official investigation. His frantic, rambling letter to his uncle is one of the only surviving first-hand accounts. He wrote, "It is not a sickness of the body, but of the spirit. Doctor, Finch calls us his acolytes of the new dawn, but we are lab rats. At night, the humming begins. It is not a sound. It is a pressure, a weight inside your skull. It shakes your teeth. He tells us to embrace it, to let it dissolve the illusion of self. I saw Thomas yesterday after an attunement. His eyes. Uncle, his eyes were like glass. He looked right through me. He said he'd walked in the gardens of the firmament. He died this morning. I am not waiting to see those gardens. This place is a tomb that thinks it's a cradle." Julian's letter was dismissed as the ravings of a disturbed boy. But he wasn't disturbed. He was a witness. If you've come this far, if you can feel the frequency of this story resonating within you, comment, "The veil is lifting below." You're not just a viewer anymore. You understand that some truths are felt, not told. This raises a crucial question. Why would the most powerful families in America, pragmatic, ruthless men of industry and politics, entrust their sons to a mystic like Finch and his bizarre theories? The answer is simple. Finch wasn't working for himself. He had backers. The Elysian Vale Seminary was funded by a clandestine organization, an American offshoot of a European secret society that had existed for centuries. Let's call them the architects. These were not mystics or dreamers. They were the ultimate realists. They understood that true, lasting power wasn't held by armies or governments, but by influencing thought itself. They had a long-term vision, to create a new ruling class, a strain of humanity with superior cognitive and psychological abilities. They had the wealth and the influence, but they lacked the methodology. In Finch and his soul engine, they saw the answer. They saw a path to creating leaders who were not just smarter or more disciplined, but who operated on an entirely different level of consciousness, unbound by the empathy and morality that held back ordinary men. The dead boys weren't a tragedy. To them, they were research and development costs. Finch's ambition, and that of his backers, went far beyond creating a few supermen. The ultimate goal was far more insidious. He wasn't just tuning individuals. He was trying to tune them all to the exact same frequency. In his journals, he theorized about a concept he called conscious harmonics. He believed that if he could get a critical mass of minds, say, 16 vibrating in perfect sympathetic resonance, they would cease to be individual minds. They would become nodes in a single, vast, telepathic network. A silent hive mind. A council of souls that could share thoughts, strategize, and act in perfect concert, all without speaking a word. Imagine the power. The ability to manipulate markets, to steer political discourse, to crush rivals, all orchestrated by a silent, invisible network of minds. This was the architect's endgame, not just to create better leaders, but to build a hidden system of control that would be utterly undetectable and therefore utterly unstoppable. The 16 students weren't just students. They were the prototype servers for a psychic internet dot by March of 1837. The death toll had reached 15. The seminary was a skeleton staff of terrified servants and a handful of surviving students, now little more than walking specters. The authorities had come and gone, baffled and useless. The architects were growing impatient. Finch knew he was running out of time. He announced to the remaining few that the final phase of the experiment was at hand. He called it the Great Attunement. He believed that the loss of the 15 had consecrated the space, creating a psychic vacuum that would amplify the engine's power exponentially. He intended to push the machine to its absolute limit. His goal was no longer just to loosen the soul, but to achieve a permanent, stable resonance to get one of them to cross over and become the first anchor, the first permanent node for the network. It was the ultimate gamble. He would either achieve his life's work or shatter the minds of every living thing in the valley. That night, as a blizzard raged outside, he locked himself in the bell tower and prepared to throw the switch. There's a story, a rumor, that a single daguerreotype was taken of the 16th victim, a boy named Samuel. Imagine seeing it, a silver plate, cold to the touch. The image is hauntingly clear. Samuel is lying in his bed, just like the others. But look at his face. It's not a mask of terror. There are no signs of pain. It's ecstatic. His eyes are slightly open, gazing at something you can't see. His lips are parted in a faint, knowing smile. It is the face of someone who saw something overwhelmingly beautiful at the very end. Or it is the face of a beautiful, perfect, empty house after the tenant has moved out for good. That night, as the soul engine roared to life, it didn't just hum. The entire valley vibrated. Servants hiding in the cellar later said the ground shook and the air grew thick and heavy, crackling with an unseen energy. Inside the chapel, the last student, Samuel, convulsed once and then fell completely still, the blissful smile locking onto his face. The 16th victim. But Finch, watching his instruments in the tower, saw something else. According to a final triumphant entry in his journal, his machines registered a phenomenon he had only dreamed of. At the precise moment of Samuel's death, there was a massive energy spike, but it didn't dissipate. It stabilized. It became a steady, continuous signal. A beacon. He hadn't just snapped the cord. He believed he had successfully transferred the boy's consciousness into the fabric of the network itself. Samuel hadn't died. He had ascended. He was the first node. The great attunement hadn't failed. It had worked. The 16 deaths weren't. The cost of failure They were the price of creating an immortal, invisible system of power. In the aftermath, the cleanup was swift and mercilessly efficient. The architects descended on Elysian Vale. The official story, fed to the few newspapers who bothered to report it, was a sudden, virulent outbreak of scarlet fever. It was a lie, but it was a simple, believable lie. The remaining students, the ones who had been tuned but survived, were quietly retrieved by their families. They would spend the rest of their lives as strange, withdrawn figures, powerful in their own right, but always distant. The bodies of the 16 were returned to their families in sealed caskets, with stern warnings from Finch's backers that any talk of the true circumstances would have devastating consequences for their fortunes and their reputations. The families, complicit in their ambition and now terrified of the forces they had funded, obeyed. They buried their sons, and they buried the truth along with them. The seminary itself was dismantled stone by stone. All records were burned. Within a decade, the forest had reclaimed the land. Elysian Vale, Dr. Finch, and 16 dead boys were systematically and professionally erased from American history. And what of Dr. Alastair Finch? He was never seen again. There is no grave, no death certificate, no record of him ever leaving the country. He and his soul engine simply vanished. Did the architects eliminate him to protect their secret? Or did something else happen on that final night? One of Finch's last journal entries offers a chilling possibility. He wrote, "The network requires a shepherd, a prime operator to maintain the harmony. Once the beacon is lit, the operator may join it." Is it possible that Finch, his life's work complete, turned the engine on himself? Did he attempt to follow his students, to become the central consciousness of the network he had created? It's a terrifying thought. A mad scientist becoming a ghost in his own machine, an invisible god at the heart of an invisible empire. Whatever the truth, one thing is certain. Alastair Finch disappeared, but the power structure he had birthed did not. It had its foundation. It had its 16 nodes. And it was just getting started. So what happened next? The network didn't need the soul engine anymore. It had its foundation, anchored in the 16 sacrificed souls. The architects now had a new focus, cultivating the bloodlines. The real prize wasn't the boys who died. It was the ones who survived. The ones whose minds had been permanently altered, retuned to be sensitive to the network's frequency. These survivors went on to have families of their own. And it seems the sensitivity, the psychic attunement, was an inheritable trait. The architects began to guide these families, arranging marriages, managing fortunes, placing their descendants in key positions of power in finance, media, and government. They were cultivating a secret aristocracy, a bloodline of men and women who possessed an innate, intuitive connection to the network. They didn't need to be told what to do. They could just feel it. A subtle nudge, a shared intuition, a collective will guiding their decisions, ensuring they always acted in the network's best interest. The experiment at Elysian Vale was over, but the dynasty it created was just beginning to flex its muscles. On the world stage, they don't need machines now. They have bloodlines, and the hum. The hum became an instinct. So why isn't this the most studied event in history? Why is science silent? Because investigating it would require admitting the possibility of things that modern science has built its entire reputation on denying. You cannot put a soul under a microscope. You cannot measure psychic resonance with a caliper. The entire event was designed to be untraceable, to leave behind no physical evidence. The deaths at Elysian Vale defy pathology. They mock it. For a modern scientist to take this story seriously, they would have to question the very foundations of their materialist worldview. They would have to entertain the idea that consciousness is not just a byproduct of the brain, but a fundamental, force of the universe. It's easier, safer, and better for one's career to dismiss it as a myth, a folktale. The silence of science isn't a sign of ignorance. It's an act of self-preservation. Some doors are kept closed for a reason. But do we really believe that a technology this powerful was used only once and then abandoned? Or has it simply evolved? Think about the strange, unexplained phenomena that baffle our own era. The so-called Havana syndrome, where diplomats suffer neurological damage from an unseen, unheard source. Scientists speculate about microwave weapons, but what if it's a more refined version of Finch's engine? A targeted weapon that can detune a human mind from a distance. Consider the sudden, inexplicable collapses of seemingly healthy public figures, or the waves of mass hysteria that seem to grip populations overnight. Are these random events? Or are they the echoes of the Great Attunement? The ripples created by a hidden network adjusting the frequency of global consciousness. We look for answers in politics and economics, but maybe we should be looking at physics, a hidden physics. The same physics that silenced 16 boys in a New York winter almost 200 years ago. Let's be clear. This was never about good versus evil. That's a child's story. This was about something far more profound. It was about creating a new definition of humanity. Finch and the architects saw conventional morality, empathy, compassion, guilt as weaknesses. Bugs in the human operating system that prevented true, objective, efficient leadership. They weren't trying to create evil men. They were trying to create post-human men. Leaders who could make ruthless decisions for the greater good without the emotional friction that plagues the rest of us. It is the ultimate expression of elite psychology, the belief that they are not just better than us, but fundamentally different. That the rules of humanity do not apply to them because they are guiding humanity's destiny. The 16 dead boys were not a crime in their eyes. They were a necessary, logical step in a long, ambitious, evolutionary project. It was the ultimate pursuit of self-mastery, twisted into the ultimate tool of control. Once you accept the possibility of this network, you start to see the world differently. You start to question everything. The sudden stock market crash that no one saw coming. The inexplicable political shift that changes the course of a nation. The rise of a charismatic leader who seems to come out of nowhere. We are taught to see history as a chaotic series of accidents and reactions. But what if it's not? What if, behind the noise and the chaos, there is a signal, a guiding intelligence, a silent consensus among a handful of minds, nudging events, steering the ship of civilization from a hidden room? They don't need to issue orders. They don't need conspiracies. All they need is a shared, resonant intent. A quiet, collective will that pushes the world, inch by inch, in their desired direction. We see the waves, but we don't see the current running deep beneath the surface. And this brings us back to you. You are here because you seek knowledge. You seek mastery over your own life, your own mind. You sense that there are levels to the game you haven't accessed yet. But what if the final level is guarded? What if the path to true power, to the kind of influence the architects created, is deliberately obscured? They don't want more people joining their network. They want subjects. They want an audience. The entire system of modern society, from our education to our entertainment, could be seen as a form of low-level frequency control. A broadcast designed to keep the masses docile, distracted, and vibrating at a frequency that can be easily managed. You are fighting to raise your own frequency, but you are fighting against a current that has been flowing for 2 centuries. A current paid for with the silent, serene deaths of 16 young men. Is there any proof? Any thread you can pull on? Almost nothing. The architects were too good, too thorough. But there is one thing. A footnote in an obscure, privately published history of New York's founding families, written in the late 1800s. It's a passing reference in a letter from one of the fathers of a boy who died. He doesn't mention the seminary by name. He simply writes of his son's tragic passing during what he calls ... an unfortunate but necessary resonance cascade. Resonance cascade. That is not the language of a grieving father in 1837 talking about a fever. That is the language of an engineer, the language of a physicist, the language of an investor checking on his project. It is the single chilling breadcrumb left behind, a quiet admission that it was all real. The story of Elysian Vale isn't just a tale of technology and conspiracy. It's a parable about sacrifice. The architects wanted to build an immortal system of power, a structure that would outlive them, outlive nations. But immortality has a price. In this case, the price was 16 souls. They weren't just killed. They were consumed. They were transformed from living, breathing individuals into raw material. They became the foundational code, the spiritual bedrock for a new kind of empire. An empire without borders, without armies, without a name. An empire of pure consciousness. This is the ultimate secret of the elites. They understand that to create something truly permanent, something must be utterly destroyed. They didn't just break the rules of human decency. They broke the rules of life and death itself. And in doing so, they created a power that operates outside both. Look around. Look at the world we live in. A world of increasing polarization. Of people who seem to be living in completely different realities, unable to communicate. We blame social media algorithms and political propaganda. But what if we're only seeing the symptoms, not the cause? What if this is the ultimate result of the architect's project? A world intentionally detuned. A population deliberately fractured. By competing frequencies, making it impossible for us to ever achieve the kind of harmonic resonance that could challenge their control. They achieved unity for themselves by enforcing division on everyone else. The constant noise and conflict of our modern world isn't an accident. It is the sound of our cage. A psychic static broadcast on a global scale to ensure they're silent. Network is the only one that can think clearly. And so, we arrive at the final chilling realization. The project at Elysian Vale wasn't just about creating a new form of leader. It was about defining the limits for everyone else. By creating a network that operates on a higher frequency, they simultaneously lowered the ceiling on human potential. For the rest of the world, they didn't just build a private club. They built a prison for everyone outside of it. A prison of the mind, with walls made of psychic interference. This is the deepest secret of all. The systems of control are not just external in our governments and our economies. They are internal. They are resonant. They have been carefully, scientifically designed to limit our perception, to dull our intuition, to keep our souls from ever vibrating at a frequency that could threaten the established harmony of the powerful. You came here seeking secrets. Now you have one, and it's a heavy burden to carry. To know that the world may not be what it seems. To suspect the very static in your own mind might not be your own. This knowledge changes you. It forces you to question everything. Your motivations, your desires, the very thoughts you believe are yours. This is the true price of looking behind the veil. You can never go back to seeing the world in the same way. You are now aware of the signal beneath the noise. You are aware of the cage. The question is, what do you do with that knowledge? Do you let it crush you? Or do you use it as a tool, a tuning fork to try and find your own clear frequency amidst the overwhelming static? The most disturbing part is this. The network is not a thing of the past. It's here. It's now. It's the silent, organizing principle behind the world you experience every day. The work of Dr. Finch and the architects was a success beyond their wildest dreams. They created a self-perpetuating, self-aware system of influence. It no longer needs active management. It simply is. The bloodlines continue. The inherited sensitivity to its frequency ensures the right people continue to find their way to the right positions of power. They don't need to conspire in smoke-filled rooms. Their consciousness is already harmonized. Their actions are already aligned. They are all listening to the same music. A low, persistent hum that the rest of us were never meant to hear. What did the 16 students really become? They are not angels. They are not ghosts. They are infrastructure. They are the psychic pylons holding up a system of global control. Their consciousness, stripped from their bodies, was woven into the very fabric of this new reality. They are the silent partners in every major corporation, the unseen advisors to every world leader. Every time a decision is made that concentrates power, that increases control, that reinforces the status quo of the elite, their silent, resonant sacrifice is being honored. They are the ultimate testament to the philosophy of the architects, that the individual is temporary, but the system, the network, can be made to last forever. Their deaths were not an end. They were a transaction. Their lives in exchange for a world remade in their master's image. Before this ends, you must ask yourself one final question. Dr. Finch needed a machine to begin his work. He needed his soul engine to create the first nodes. But now, the network is established. It is self-sustaining. It is powerful. What if it no longer needs to work on just a select few? What if, over the last 200 years, it has learned to tune the entire global population? What if our media, our technology, our very culture has become the new soul engine, a vast, complex apparatus designed to subtly manage the resonant frequency of all of humanity? What if the feeling of anxiety, of confusion, of powerlessness that defines modern life isn't a flaw in the system? What if it's the system working perfectly? The 16 students didn't just die. They became the foundation. They are the silence in between the notes of our chaotic world, the unseen architecture of power that we mistake for nature. Their perfect, placid deaths were not failures. They were the cost of building a prison for every other mind on the planet. The experiment never ended. It just went global. And the hum of the engine, it's the constant, low-grade anxiety you feel every single day. It's the background radiation of our reality. The proof that you are living inside their machine. Asterisk. Now you know.